Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 2 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, reading The Power of Myth, a conversation between the mythologist Joseph Campbell and the journalist Bill Moyers that was recorded in the 80s and released on PBS in 1987. We just talked about this last episode.
I thought it was 89.
89. Might have been 89. But we are, of course, starting on the very first chapter, the first episode as it was released, about myth and the modern world. I really like this chapter. I think it really went into some neat ideas, and I'm excited to talk about it.
I'm expecting you to say that every chapter.
Yes. Well, I've done it for the past, 78 episodes that we've been doing this podcast.
True.
Full seasons.
No, this guy's a neat thinker, and I appreciate his thinking thoughts on these subjects.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm very glad to hear that. So we start off, Bill Moyers starts off kind of asking the question, why study myth? I really like Joseph Campbell's response here. He says,
I thought you might.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I don't believe in studying a subject because it's said to be important. Then he kind of goes on to say, however, with a proper introduction, mythology can really grab you. There's really no set importance because it is important. You really have to find that for yourself. And I really like these few lines here.
Which page are you on?
I'm on page 1. This is going to go into page 2.
Gosh, this is going to be a long podcast.
It might be. One of our problems today is that we are not well acquainted with the literature of the spirit. We're interested in the news of the day and the problems of the hour. It used to be that the university campus was a kind of hermetically sealed off area where the news of the day did not impinge upon your attention to the inner life and to the magnificent human heritage we have in our great tradition. Plato, Confucius, the Buddha, Goethe, and others who speak of the eternal values that have to do with the centering of our lives. When you get to be older and the concerns of the day have all been attended to, and you turn to the inner life, well, if you don't know where it is or what it is, you'll be sorry. And then he kind of goes on to talk about, the loss of the teaching of Greek and Latin and the loss of teaching all this biblical literature. We've really lost this whole tradition of mythological info in the West. And he kind of then, goes on to say, we tell all these stories to come to terms with, reality and to harmonize our lives with reality and that sort of thing. So I really liked this section here, because I think that is a problem. I think we've talked about this exact thing and, this loss of this mythological tradition here.
Yes. There's a lot that we could talk about in that little excerpt about the degradation of higher education. But I appreciate his sentiments about it, like college being kind of sealed off from the day-to-day, like the news of the day or the problems of the day. I don't know that was ever true, though. Mm-hmm. But I think the focus, once you're in the classroom, the professor was going to teach the subject, period. And even when I was in college, current events did not come in, unless you're, in a class that deals with current events, poli-sci type stuff or whatever the subject matter is. So I think I appreciate what he's saying. And in the 80s, I think his statements were a little bit more true because now it's just politics permeates everything, every subject. But that's a whole other subject for another podcast, probably. But I also appreciate his recommendation of a shared storyline, or at least a shared knowledge of stories. Mm-hmm. And whether it's mythology or it's something else, there doesn't seem to be a common frame of reference in our society except for pop culture. Mm-hmm. And I mean by TV shows, TikTok stars or Snapchat or whatever the heck is going on, and movies. Yeah. TV shows and movies will get people my age in to have a common story. Yeah, and that's really all we have in common, because people don't read the Bible anymore, which was a common thing, and people would read. I mean, people first of all, less people went to university before. And those fewer people got a lot better education. Yeah. And you didn't have to, even when you get out of high school, you had a better education. You do a lot of times now, unless you're, it says something that if you apply yourself, in high school now, like in any of the local high schools, you can come out with an associate's degree and you should, because it's so much more cost effective, but you can have an associate's degree easily if you're reasonably intelligent, you work hard in any of the local schools here in our area, and I think it's true of any area that would allow for college credit. So that either means that the university is really teaching a high school curriculum, or the high schools are not teaching the other stuff. I mean, there's some sort of there's something missing there when you can get half of your college degree when you're still in high school without really breaking a sweat.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of those things is like what we were saying earlier, kind of the permeation of politics. And, I've had so much less of that sort of political nature in high school than I do now in college.
Right.
Because I think really this is one of the examples, or should be one of the examples he kind of puts forth here. We'll talk about this a little later, but how we see, mythological roles in our society. We've almost given professors of universities one of those sorts of roles.
Correct.
Well, they are the voice of everything on this topic. We have to listen to what they say. And I don't know if it's necessarily the students that give them that role, or if it's the professors themselves that sort of take on that role. I've studied this for years. I am the sole voice on this.
They seize the authority of moral and
yeah. So it's not just I know a whole lot about this subject. Let me tell you about how all of these current events somewhat relate to this topic while I have the time and have all of you students in this classroom right now.
Right. They almost need to have every class now taught by two professors at the same time that have opposing political views. and then at some point they would come to a détente where they will just teach the subject instead of arguing with each other the entire time. But I think it might take them about 2 years of arguing, and then that third class that comes through, the third year of class, the freshmen that may benefit from having the previous 2 years having to listen to these two guys argue with each other about nonsense. But of course now it wouldn't work because there's no Republicans in academia anyway. But anyway, back to his point though, which is the stories, the common stories and the mythology, and of course he is obviously a huge proponent of knowing and studying and following the mythological stories, whatever they may be.
Yeah, I want to get into his sort of like opinions on what our modern mythological stuff is a little bit later. There's a couple more points I want to make here early on. He goes on to talk about, imperfections. He says, we love people for their imperfections. The perfect human is very uninteresting. So, all these main characters in any story we tell, they're usually not 100% perfect. He says, perfection would be a bore, wouldn't it? This is Moyer speaking. Then Campbell responds, it would have to be. It would be inhuman. The umbilical point, the humanity, the thing that makes you human and not supernatural and immortal, that's what's lovable. That is why some people have a very hard time loving God, because there's no imperfection there. You can be in awe, but that would not be real love. It's Christ on the cross that becomes lovable. And so he kind of goes on to say, this story of human suffering, the living and the striving, the coming to knowledge of oneself, that is what's universal for humans. It's not this idea of the perfect being. It's, what makes us imperfect. And we need to tell and understand our own story and kind of cope with death and need life to signify the eternal. And that's our main reasons in sort of telling these stories, to kind of come to terms with, why there is so much hardship out there and, what that means for us and why we even have life in the first place if it's full of these struggles.
Yeah, his statement about having difficulty loving God because God is perfect really resonated with me. I thought that was a really brilliant thought. I'd never heard that articulated before, or I may have watched these shows, may have forgotten it. But I had that underlined and a couple stars next to it because I think that's just a really, really neat way to look at that relationship, and then that people have a more personal relationship with Jesus. Mainly because his argument is mainly because of the suffering. Yeah. That Jesus and the sacrifice, and I would differ that he says that's not perfect, but I understand what he's saying. It's not all powerful.
Well, it's not all, it's God, but it's also human, essentially. That is Christ.
Yes, but I don't know that it's imperfect in the way I define it as it applies to Jesus. But I understand what he's saying, and I think that is so true, that people can relate to that suffering and that willful sacrifice, and how you can get redemption from it, and how it's so worthwhile. So he's a fascinating character.
Yeah, absolutely.
He obviously really thought, at this point in his life, he obviously had been thinking about these concepts for decades.
Towards the end of his life. I mean, Correct. He died 2 years, or the year after, I believe, they recorded this, and then the PBS broadcast was a year after his death.
Right.
But yeah, he kind of goes on and elaborates on that with this experience of being alive. And so he says, we're not really searching for the meaning of life. We're looking for the experience of being alive. And he kind of says, our physical life needs to resonate within our own innermost being and reality. We need to actually feel being alive. And he says, myths are clues to the spiritual potentialities of the human life. He says, your own meaning is that you're just there. The myths teach us to turn inward. So he's kind of saying, we're not really searching for the purpose. We're searching almost for the fullness, to
Right.
really experience everything that life is. And to do that, we need myths and all these stories to be able to look inwards and, turn these hardships and look at them and bring them, to see our own innermost reality.
Yeah, I'm going to have to think more on that. I'll have to consider that more.
Yeah, that's
because-
definitely very metaphysical.
Yeah, and my immediate reaction is no. We really are searching for a purpose or a meaning in life, but I'll have to think more about it. I mean, it's very thought provoking because I never thought of it as a concept. I'm trying to just fulfill my experience in my life as opposed to the meaning, the more theoretical or Platonic ideal of what we're doing here.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's really looking for, like I said, that fullness. It's not looking for necessarily the why, but the how can I do this the best that I can? Maybe not the best, but the most, I guess, to really live out that full experience.
Correct.
Which is an interesting concept for sure.
And I think it's I certainly think that he's right in the aggregate that most people are just trying to get the most fulfilling life.
Yes.
As opposed to trying to determine the real point of it all.
Absolutely. Then he goes on. I really like his discussion on marriage here. He says, marriage is the union of the self with the self. Two halves essentially become whole. He really goes into this really...
this is very Catholic.
Yes.
In the way he talks about the one, the union and all that.
Yeah, it's really... He goes into this really pretty long discussion on, it's not really two separate people or two separate, identities or selves, coming together. They really come together to form the same self, essentially. You're not... well, I guess it is two separate selves becoming one. It's not two separate selves still being two separate selves after the union. It's after the union they become sort of the same...
kind of a different almost third party.
Yes.
That they're both the same third party together.
Yes, exactly.
I have this quote underlined: "All love affairs end in disappointment." I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
As far as an affair that just lasts for some brief period of time, which he's differentiating it from marriage.
Yeah, exactly. He says really it's not very physical. That's not what marriage is supposed to be. He says the primary goal is not to have children. It's to join in that relationship, to join in that union. He kind of goes on to say that there's really two stages that he's seen in marriage. The first stage is sort of those impulses of nature you have and raise a child. That's essentially the first stage. And he says the second stage is after the children leave. And that's where he sees a lot of marriages fail. He says, I've been surprised at how many of my friends have split with their spouses after around the age of like 40 and 50. And he kind of goes on to say that, the reason that they've split is because that they failed to recognize their own relationship there. They failed to fully become one. They might have lived a good life and raised a good child, but after that, they've kind of missed the purpose past that point.
Yeah, and I think that was more common in the 80s, 70s and 80s than it is now. The disintegration of the concept of marriage in American society is grown exponentially. Yeah. But that it's true, though, because I'm at the point in my life of 52, so we're seeing other couples getting to that point where the kids are out of the house. But I'm trying to think if there's anybody I know that is split under those terms. It seems like it's easier to split before then.
Well, I think a lot of the issues, most relationships now are not marriages. I don't know if that's 100% accurate to the stats, but I think not most, probably about half. But I mean, there's a lot of them. A significant portion are just two people who, maybe not even on purpose, have a child together.
Correct.
And of course, that usually does not.
What you mean by on purpose?
No, yes. Yes.
They just happen to bump into each other.
Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But you're not really seeing as many marriages, certainly, as you used to. So it's really, they're not even striving to get to that relationship in the first place.
Right. It's a real tragedy, I think. But going back to his points, I think he is. I disagree with me. I won't say I think he's wrong. I just disagree that he seems to think that the primary function of marriage is not to have kids, and I don't know that I agree with that.
I think really what he's saying is, where the primary goal is sort of separates from the natural. He's kind of looking at it, what is the human goal in marriage? The natural animal goal, of course, is to have children and have a family. But when we go beyond that, that's sort of the human part, and the mythological part is that spiritual union.
I go along with the mythological part, I guess. But
yes.
But I think the mythological part is also procreation.
Yes,
that's what a lot of mythology is about. I don't know. I see it as more of a continuum.
Yeah.
And it does change as your relationship with your spouse changes as the kids get older, a lot.
Yeah.
And but the way he really values the concept of marriage is fundamental is refreshing, because you don't see that as often.
Absolutely.
Especially when you have kind of I gather he's probably left of center, but he's certainly not somebody that's talking about traditional marriage as the end all be all. And it's kind of refreshing to see someone really espousing the ideal of a good marriage, and that it truly is a joining, and you kind of merge yourself. And if you don't merge yourself with the other self, you don't quite have a marriage. And I think that's what a lot of people, I agree with them, it's a mistake a lot of people make, that they don't make that kind of compromise or that kind of sacrifice, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah, I think this quote here kind of sums up what he's saying. He says, marriage is a relationship. When you make the sacrifice in marriage, you're sacrificing not to each other, but to unity in a relationship.
Yeah, I have that underlined too. That's
and I'm not 100%. I'm not 100% sure. If I 100% agree with that. I do think there is.
You're wrong, because it's 100%
really
right. Yeah, because there's compromise with the other individual, but your sacrifice is for the benefit of the marriage of that relationship. I'm just joking about being wrong.
Yes.
But I do believe that you're wrong.
Well, thank you. So it wasn't a joke.
It was a joke that you are wrong.
Yes.
Because it's kind of a matter of opinion. But I think he is right. In that you're not sacrificing really for the other person. You're compromising with the other person. But you're really, if you're doing it right, I think you're sacrificing for the relationship, for the marriage. And you both have to do it, not at the same time necessarily, but it has to be, I guess, that willingness to move that relationship forward.
Yeah, I guess that's where he would kind of say that's what makes a marriage, is that union. Because you can sacrifice for anybody. We have all kinds of other relationships, but marriage is the most unique one, where both people ought to sacrifice for the relationship itself, not necessarily just out of love for the other person, but love for that relationship as a whole.
Well, he really is degrading towards love affairs.
Yes.
Which I thought was really interesting, that he just says all love affairs end in disappointment. And he mentions that if you're thinking that it's just a long-term love affair, they'll be divorced very soon.
Yeah.
And boy, that's so true. Because it really just kind of wears off. I'll give you this. Marriage, the relationship in marriage ebbs and flows. You'll have peaks and you'll have valleys, and you don't know how long your valleys are going to be, or how long your peaks are going to be. And
we talked about this exact thing last season when we were talking about the story of Eros and Psyche.
Right. Yeah. And so there's a lot of truth to this. And if you don't make those sacrifices for the relationship when you're in a trough, when you're down low and you're like, oh man, but you're not, and you really are not doing it for the other person then, because at some points in your marriage, you're like, oh, darn it. You're not doing it for the other, because if you're doing it for the other person, you become resentful because they're not doing enough for you or whatever the case may be. You really have to do it be so right. And he's articulating it in a way that I didn't even think of it. It's brilliant guy. Yeah. And I completely agree with that. You're sacrificing for the relationship, for that marriage that is this almost like a third party you become. Your team.
Yeah, exactly.
And it goes back to my number one rule of marriage. It's not love. It's not lust. It is loyalty. The number one thing, you have to be loyal. And if you're loyal, you'll get through 90% of the difficulties. because if you're loyal, you're never going to even start down a path of cheating. You know, if you're loyal, you're never going to degrade the other person in public. Now, you can badmouth them to a friend or a minister or a counselor or something, but that's not disloyal. Disloyal, especially for guys, disloyal, I think, is when your wife's not around saying to the guys, "Oh, look at that gal." Oh, you know, that's disloyal because you're necessarily saying that gal's better looking than
well, that kind of directly relates to the point he's making. It's not necessarily about the other person. You know, it can be perfectly nice to the other person and loving when they're there. Right. But if you're degrading that relationship when they're not around, that kind of undermines the entire marriage. Yeah, you got to be loyal
to the team. It's like those super fans, you know, those professional, those fans that think they're part of the team. Like, we scored a touchdown, you know, they're screaming at the TV saying, "No, you didn't do anything. You're sitting on the couch." But it's that kind of loyalty. You got to be on that team, and then other members of the team, which are other fans too. Yes. You can say, "Oh, that pitcher stinks, and we need to get a different pitcher in there." And this manager, but you never say that. You'll never, as a Cardinal fan, you're not going to say that to a Cubs fan.
Yes, exactly.
You're going to say, "Well, yeah, our guys aren't the best, but they're better than your team."
Yeah.
And so that you need to have that loyalty in order for a marriage to last long. And so I think that's pretty much what he's kind of saying, is that you got to be on that team, man.
Yes. And he kind of ends this by saying, you know, marriage is primarily spiritual, but it ought to be supported by society. And that's kind of how he goes into, you know, what happens to a society without mythology. Yeah. And I really like this section. There's this interchange here. Moyer says, you know, what happens when a society no longer embraces a powerful mythology? And Campbell responds, what we've got on our hands. If you want to find out what it means to have a society without any rituals, read the New York Times. Moyer says, and you'd find, Campbell responds, the news of the day, including destructive and violent acts by young people who don't know how to behave in a civilized society. And so he says, you know, without mythology, kids make their own. And that's where we get all these gangs, and graffiti kind of plays into that, and, you know, the symbols of, you know, their own society. And their society eventually becomes incompatible with the society around them and outside of them.
Yep, and we've got it. I call it the criminal subculture. And it crosses across racial groups, ethnic groups, and all that kind of stuff. I'm not talking about. There's different criminal subcultures, but they're there, and it's because they don't share the same story and history that we do. They just don't. And for that's why, like, the messages of, well, if you work hard and you get a job and you do this, it doesn't resonate with them because they don't have anybody in their life that has done that, for crying out loud.
Or they've been told, or they've been explicitly told, you know, that doesn't work. Yeah. You know, here's the other way to do that works better.
Right.
But yeah, I think this is one of the points here. He's spot on, you know, right here, and I think a couple other times really predicting, you know, to a greater extent, you know, of course this was going on back in the 80s, but even now, especially now, it's gotten, you know, to a greater extent than where he was at the moment.
Right.
Then he kind of goes on to say that America has no ethos. This is an interesting point.
What
I thought
page are you on?
I believe this is page. Let me see. I don't have this noted down.
Know.
Page 10.
Okay. So he says one of my favorite quotes.
Oh, you can go ahead and read the quote.
Well, I don't know what you're going to say, but I love this, and I think this is so true. And you see a big push in, I don't want to get too political, but in populism currently, with like the MAGA agenda and the America First agenda. There's a quote on page 8 where he says, "Man should not be in the service of society. Society should be in the service of man." And I think that is true if you change society to government, you know. And I think that we have to focus on that the society. Who was I just talking to? I was arguing with Sam just earlier tonight about we've discussed this in previous podcasts about whether we're naturally good, by nature good, or you know, evil and destructive and chaos. And my theory is that a proper society will structure itself in such a way as to encourage better behavior, and a good society is going to do that because, you know, if you got a little toddler running around biting kids, you discipline that child, and you can't go around biting people, and eventually, you know, so you're even from a very young age, you're giving certain directions about not attacking people and taking other kids' toys and stuff, and it goes on up from there. You know, obviously, that's the basics, and we need to have a society that has certain core values And that society, and especially the government, needs to be serving the people,
Yes.
as opposed to the people serving the government, or an individual serving society. I think he is absolutely right. Is that the society has to benefit the individuals, or it's not a functioning society.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I necessarily agree.
What?
Yeah, believe it or not. About that we are naturally good. I think you're right that we naturally want to make systems that help us be better.
I don't think they're
think so?
naturally good.
Oh, well, then
I'm saying that we need the society to focus on us so that we are basically domesticated.
Yes, then I agree with you. I thought you were saying, because we are naturally good, we make societies that sort of better us.
No, that's not
okay.
what I'm
So
saying.
you're
I'm
saying
in order to have a functioning society and a functioning populace, you have to have rules in a society that supports that type of behavior.
Then I agree with you.
Yeah.
Because I don't think naturally we would just do the good thing.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And that I think that kind of relates in a way to what I was about to say. America has no ethos because he says that really homogenized cultures have understood unwritten rules. And he says America has so many different cultures in one that strict laws have replaced an understood ethos. And I think that's kind of what you're saying, in that we need these strict laws in a way. Well,
no, I kind of disagree with them because I agree with them. I disagree with them because I think that there was an ethos, an American ethos. I just think it was so natural to him, it was overlooked maybe.
Yes.
Because now we don't have that ethos that we had even in the 80s, because the ethos was, work for the things that you get, and don't expect everybody else to give you a handout. You don't hurt other people. You don't take from other people. There's a rule of law, and there's property rights and individual responsibilities.
But I think he's right, especially more so now.
Yeah.
In that we don't necessarily kind of internalize those things. We don't have those things unwritten, like you're just saying. Rule of law and property, and
and we used to have a lot more civic instruction in schools and in the home. In both the schools and the home, maybe more so in the home than the schools. We're lacking in that common story and common belief in the melting pot, et cetera, et cetera. And I think he was onto something, because he certainly is recognizing that it's not good and it's getting worse. And I think he would be appalled to live in today's world to see how bad it's gotten. And I think it supports his theory. I think what has happened since then really supports what he thinks is one of the bases for it not working, is that we don't have this common mythology. He calls it mythology, but a common belief and core values. We certainly don't seem to agree on a whole lot of
and I think
those core issues.
That's where we get what he's saying here, and that we've sort of replaced those core values with just strict laws. The law must be moral because it's written here, and these people know everything, or maybe don't know everything. And I think that's really what he's getting at here is because we've lost those intrinsic values.
Correct.
We're looking at what is strictly written for me to follow.
Yes, there's too many people. Like there's laws that were made malum prohibitum, which means it's prohibited, so it's wrong, or it's illegal. And malum in se, which means by its very nature it's wrong, and it should be prohibited and made illegal. And there's too much now that people say, well, if it's against the law, it's not. It's wrong to do.
Well, I mean, we've talked about this before. It's like, why is there a speed limit? Is that inherently wrong to drive this speed on this road? Well, no, it's just illegal because it's stated. And you can kind of extend that to
utilitarian argument that we have to have some sort of speed. I think, of course, the roads are designed for a certain speed.
Yes.
But of course, they're designed also for you to go faster than the speed limit. At least 10 miles per hour over the speed limit.
Of course, like the underlying, principle there is, so, if you hit somebody, you don't get, hurt, or, you don't kill that person. But essentially, there's nothing inherently wrong with driving that specific speed.
Right.
But, like murder, that is inherently wrong. That is absolutely prohibited because it is evil.
Yes. Murder.
Yes.
Not just killing.
Yes.
There's a difference. And I'm always shocked by how often I get a question. I'm a lawyer, so I get a question. How do I have any liability for this? And it seems to be in a context of not somebody doing anything, but failing to do something to protect somebody else, or just being present or own. Like a big one is, we own this property. What if somebody comes on and hurts themselves? Am I liable for that? Or what if somebody does something inherently reckless near me? Am I No, you're not liable for. Why would on earth you think you'd be liable? Because they think that they're confused by the law, and the law doesn't make any sense. Used to have a lot more common sense decades ago. But it's that kind of theory that everybody's so concerned about. What does the law say you can or can't do? Nobody even considers what you should or shouldn't do.
Yeah.
And
It's what is legal and what is illegal, not what is right and what is wrong.
And that's why the liberals love just making laws and regulations and stuff, because it's a substitute for religious views.
Yes, and we'll get into that a little bit later. I don't want to
go crazy about the abortion stuff.
I don't want to go too into detail there because I think there's a good opportunity.
We have to make our own minds up.
Campbell kind of goes on from there to talk about sort of academia, but also kind of relates to that laws and that ethos there with the idea of a generalist. He says there's really a tendency towards specialization in academic fields. There's a lack of teaching of the life values of subjects, which I want to get into in just a second. But then he says generalists can look at problems that are more genuinely human and not specifically cultural. And this is an interesting point here, because in a way, you could kind of look at this as the exact opposite of what we were saying earlier, in that professors shouldn't inject politics and their own values into things. But I don't know if that's necessarily what he's saying here.
No, he's not.
Yes, yeah. I'm just saying it could be portrayed that way. Yes, because really what he's saying is we have to teach enough general stuff to really get at the core of what value can the student get from this, essentially, and to look at life itself by teaching enough broadly to get to really the core.
Right. And you see quite often it's kind of a similar thought, that people who are experts in an individual field are often presumed that they are experts in everything. You can do that coding very well, but you have no idea what you're talking about in this other subject, especially when it comes to values or morality.
And that kind of gets into what I was saying earlier, like the professors have taken that mythological role. If you graduate with this piece of paper, all of a sudden, you know everything. Or you should be treated as if you know everything. You might know a lot about that one subject, but that does not mean that you are the end-all, be-all on the virtues and vices of all of society.
And I gotta tell you, I'm astounded by the degradation in the value of bachelor's degrees just in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
I have virtually no value. I put almost no value on an undergraduate degree in my field, and I put very little value in a law degree. And I'm now, when I interview people, I want to know what work they've done.
Yeah.
And the more labor intensive, the more I respect them, and the more likely I'm going to hire them.
Yeah.
So I had one guy that actually made an offer to, and he rejected it, and then he didn't pass the bar. It's just like, oh my gosh. Anyway, but he was a laborer on a concrete road crew. Didn't even have it on his resume. But I asked him, have you ever had any jobs outside of what you have listed on your resume, when you're in college or high school or whatever. And that's really what sealed the deal to make a job offer, because he actually worked for a living. And for me, if you're smart enough, to do the job, that's only, maybe a third of what we do.
Yeah.
And the rest of it's just getting along with people and having a work ethic.
Yeah, and this notion kind of goes back to what we were saying last time about, Campbell's, story of, you have your whole life to do the reading. So I think that's really what he's saying here.
Right.
You have all of this time to just get general knowledge of so many things.
Right.
Do that, and you'll be able to look at life itself much better. And that's something I really agree with.
Yeah, you need that foundation to build on it, so that you can learn about all these different subjects.
Yes.
Anyway, let's move along. This is going to be like a 4-hour episode.
Yeah, this is going to be a bit long, but
13 pages.
I don't mind.
42-page chapter.
Then Campbell kind of goes on a little bit more biographical about his introduction to myth. He says, he was raised Roman Catholic, and it was there that he learned all these mythic motifs of, Christ coming into the world, teaching, dying, resurrecting, returning to heaven. Mm-hmm. And then later, he saw Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. And then he began reading all these Native American stories, and he found these exact same motifs.
And this is where he went off the reservation.
What?
Do you get it?
I do not.
Oh, he went off the Catholic reservation.
Oh.
You ever heard that expression?
I have not.
You've never heard
I've
expression?
Never heard that expression.
He went off the reservation?
No.
It means like he went crazy or something.
Oh,
but it's a reference to Indians on a reservation.
Yes.
And if India went off the reservation, they're dangerous and doing something wild and crazy. Mm-hmm. Because they were trying to be subjugated onto the reservation. You've never heard of it. He's going off the reservation.
I've never heard that. But yeah, then he goes on.
That's a great joke that our listener appreciates.
I'm sure. And then he kind of goes on to say, he's later interested in Hinduism and Arthurian legend. And again, it's all these same motifs there. And he says, the themes are timeless, but the inflection is to the culture. And I think that's something, that really underlies much of his theories is, well, of course the myths are different from, place to place, but you see all these underlying, current,
isn't that what you believe about the mythology and stuff?
I believe so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did you steal that idea from him, or did you come up with that on your own?
I might have stolen it from him, but I don't know. I mean, it gets kind of clear at some point. I mean, you've never read any Joseph Campbell, but all last season we were like, oh, well, this is very similar to this story and this story and this story. And so it's very clear, Yes. Well, clearly there's some sort of timeless notion there in all of these stories.
I think I was aware of his theories, though.
Probably.
And I think I might have watched this series back in the 80s.
Yes, maybe so.
90s or whatever.
Then he kind of goes on to talk about, the mythological themes in society today. And he brings up, we mentioned this example last time that Moyers gave in the introduction, but, judges, you put on this robe and this attire. And he also mentions kings. And when you're kind of responding to these figures, you're not actually responding to them as a person, but to their mythological role. The judge or the king could be the stupidest or most arrogant person but when you're in that courtroom or you're in that palace, you're responding to them not as a person, but as the judge or as the king. They take on that role and kind of become something more than themselves. And then he kind of goes on to say, it's also seen in joining the military and the army. And he has this interesting idea here in that we should not judge soldiers in terms of civil law, for they don't act as individuals in war, but as agents of something above them, which I think is an interesting concept, kind of an extension of, we take on these roles when we become part of these societies and stuff. And
I think with the military, there's a lot of truth to that. There's been a lot of criticism of that same theory. I'm just following orders, like with the Nazis and stuff, but there's certainly a lot of truth to that because, when you're in a war and you're ordered to go over the hill and kill all those guys on the other side of the hill, I think there's a diminished moral culpability for all that. But yeah, okay.
I mean, I think they're great examples here of, how these themes still carry through here.
And I also understand the need. I agree with it. There's a need for those roles in that, like he calls it mythology, like with the judge's robe and all that. But I don't like to be overly deferential to those roles either. I don't think I'm an anarchist in spirit, but I bristle at presumed authority as opposed to earned authority. And so there has to be a mechanism to set aside those roles.
Yeah, I think that's the difference between the judge and a king, really. Because a king gets that authority from his father, but the judge, essentially...
Or God.
Yes. You go back far enough, yes.
Right.
But a judge gets that from first, studying and becoming a lawyer, presumably, and then being elected into office.
Yeah, currently.
Yes.
Right. It used to be they were appointed by the king. So they
yes. I'm talking, modern day, yes.
But once you put that robe on, people will defer to you.
Yes.
And then some of the judges get what I call robitis. It goes right to their head.
Yes.
But that's a whole different subject.
Yes, and this is where...
altogether.
Yes. Campbell goes on to this idea of, going back to old beliefs. And I think this is somewhere where I disagree with him, because I agree in parts, of course, but he says, when myths disappear, society disintegrates, and many of these conservative religions are calling for old-time religion, but he believes that this is a mistake. Because, he goes on to say, these old religions, this older way of practicing, they served us previously, but they do not serve us now. And time has changed so fast that the morals of 50 years ago are not the morals of today. I think there is a lot of truth to that, but I disagree in that it is a mistake to go back to these old-time religions because, our society was essentially founded on a lot of these beliefs. And he kind of goes on to that a little bit later.
Right.
But if you get too far away from those, our societal structure, like he says, starts to crumble. And so I think really the solution to that is not to make new myths, but to go back to the old ones that we have, and sort of look at those values, that we had, 100, 150 years ago, that still hold true today, and, begin putting those back into place in our society.
Yeah, it's similar to like the spiritual revivals that have been common in American history in different waves.
It's been common in world history, really.
Oh yeah, but there's a long history in American history of Christian revivalism. Where you have these traveling preachers and all that become very prominent, very popular, and so yeah, I agree with you, but I don't know who's right. Because, you see, society seems to be disintegrating more now than what it was then, and I think he's right with the diagnosis. Then the question is, what's the cure?
Yeah,
and he thinks it needs to go forward with a new mythology, but how can you create a new mythology if you don't have any common beliefs or common stories?
Yeah.
And
he goes on to give examples. What I have here in this next section is, what are the new myths? Right. And very similar to what you were saying earlier, we mythologize movie characters. He kind of goes on to say, what are the new metaphors in this, sort of technological age? Right. He points to automobiles and airplanes, which, symbolize the escape from the earth, and weapons. Particularly, he kind of points to movie heroes being seen as the Lord Death. He says, I haven't seen a movie recently that doesn't have the main character with a revolver, essentially.
Movies were pretty badass back in the 80s.
But I think he's...
Legends Rambo, and those are great movies.
Yeah, but I think he's really right here, and this goes back to what we were saying. We don't have those common stories. You look to pop culture. What is the story that everybody's seen? What's the new Marvel movie, or what's the new,
Well, you have to have something you can talk about. They can, a shared experience, and with guys, it tends to be sports, and I don't follow professional sports. I'm at a disadvantage with 90% of the people I talk to. I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I think I think he's grasping a little bit, because I think we just have an evaporation of mythology, because I don't think we're creating a new one. Although now that I think about it, this thought occurs to me: St. George Floyd is a new mythological figure. Michael Brown was a mythological figure. To a lot of people, and they have murals. They painted a George Floyd mural in Afghanistan, which went over like a lead balloon with their rainbow flags in that country, that we were putting on our embassy. They're crazy.
Yes.
But and you see, and it's kind of funny because I don't know. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is a new mythology, and I'm just not a follower of it.
Well, I think this goes back to what we were saying. I think Campbell misses one of the biggest figures that we mythologize, and maybe it wasn't as popular then, but it's politicians, and that goes back to what you were saying.
JFK.
What you were saying with the laws, essentially. The laws become the new moral boundaries. Yeah. Well, of course, we'd mythologize the people who are making those laws and voting on those laws, and that becomes the politicians. I think that's a thing on both sides.
You got the mythology of Ronald Reagan, where you couldn't say anything bad about the guy, and you got the mythology of Barack Obama, which he helped feed into with his Greek columns and his halos and stuff, and his official photographers, and trying to bleed into that. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is a new mythology. They're just competing political factions.
Yes.
Maybe that's how it started out way back when. I don't know.
So.
But it's depressing as hell. Yeah. Because I'd like to have a little bit more of substance, and but I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
You're
definitely in the revival of the old myth camp.
Well, yes, right? Of course. But yeah, I really do think that the common myths now are pop culture and politics, essentially. Yeah. And then he goes on to say, I really think he was spot on here too. With this quote, is the machine going to crush humanity or serve humanity? And of course, this was really in the beginning of the computer age back in the 80s. And so, it's progressed so much farther, but he goes...
You have no idea.
Yeah.
You can't know unless you live through it.
Yeah. We say on our podcast that it's publicly available on the internet.
Yeah. Which didn't exist.
Yeah.
And you'd have to get on a radio station.
Yeah.
And you'd have to record it on a cassette and hand them out.
Mm-hmm.
But the CDs didn't exist.
Yes, I'm aware.
Crazy.
But he goes on to talk about, computers. They're almost seen as an Old Testament god or a miracle. This is back in the 80s, of course. He says, he goes into this software metaphor. Certain signals correspond to certain software programs, but can achieve the same goal as other programs. And so different myths all solve the problem of getting to the mystery of your life. However, as the software systems are incompatible with each other, different myths can be incompatible due to different ways of solving the problem. And
so
he really
you
says,
just modernize that by replacing software with apps.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You can use a calculator app from Android or for Apple. They'll both, get to the right answer.
If they're compatible, but you'll have different programs that just aren't. Like your Apple.
You're not going to download the Android
operating
calculator
system,
onto an Apple phone. He goes, each social system needs its own myths.
Right.
And that's really what his underlying, thing is here with the software metaphors. At some point, while there are, underlying themes and underlying, commonalities, there are enough differences that we become incompatible with each other.
Yeah, there's some truth to that. I don't know where you're at on this thing. Do you know what page you're on?
I'm pretty far in. I'm
okay,
in the 30s here.
Okay, because I'm going to go back to one example he gave of, these what do you call them? Rights. Like the different habits we have that are part of the mythology. I just love his example of going off a New York City street into St. Patrick's Cathedral. And you do kind of walk into another world with the stained glass and a quiet solitude and prayerful environment, and you walk back out and it's a bustling street. Yeah. It kind of reminds me, using a pop culture reference for our mythological friends, of Doctor Strange's, whatever he calls his
Sanctum
building.
Sanctorum?
Yeah, Sanctum Sanctorum, which is very similar. He has a very similar structure as walking into a church, which I think they did on purpose or whatever. But you are kind of walking into a different world when you go into a beautiful church.
Yeah,
doesn't have to be Catholic.
And that kind of goes back to his point earlier about about how America has no ethos. You have such different pockets of culture or of society in all these different places. It's hard to homogenize those and get to a common ethos there, which I think is pretty true.
It's not impossible though, because we used to have it. We used to have it, and they referenced de Tocqueville, or however you pronounce that French French dude's name that toured America in young America, about the anarchy of the country and how we're, so many different people striving and struggling. But there was a common ethos back then about what an American is, and it became even stronger over the decades after that. And I just think that it's kind of like the Judeo-Christian values, or those post-Renaissance values of reason and learning, and that there are facts, there are things you can know that are firm and established and not ever changing. And I think that is the ethos we're losing, and a certain civic mindedness and lawfulness, behavior and outlook. And, obvious, the old story is, like, well, if you're in a candy store and nobody would see you, you get to steal the candy. Well, the answer should always be no.
Yeah.
But I don't know what people answer nowadays, honestly, if they just to themselves. If you know you're never going to get caught, are you going to steal the money? I don't know. I think a lot of people are going to say yeah. Yeah. Because what difference does it make? So they had more money or whatever. It's still wrong to take something you didn't earn. Yeah. And that used to be a more commonly held view, I think. But maybe I'm just being cynical. I don't know. I hope I'm being cynical. And I hope there's more of a revival or a reassertion. I'm hoping that we just have to reassert that common mythology, that common ethos that I know, well, most people around here believe. I believe they believe. It's hard to know,
I agree. Then he goes on, I'm surprised we actually haven't gotten into this earlier in this episode, but he goes on to talk about, moderns and nature. And this is kind of where he gets into his idea of what the new myth should be.
Yeah, the Gaius bullshit.
Yes. Because he says, as we destroy nature, we destroy the natural revelations in our own nature as well.
He gets into the consciousness of the vegetables and shit.
Well, Campbell,
Pardon my language, but that's what I think of it.
Yeah. Well, he really believes that we need to recognize that we are one with the earth. We are the earth's consciousness, essentially. And he kind of goes on to say, say, this was true back in the 80s, and it's much more true now, that says scientists are beginning to open up to this idea of, this sort of universal, or global, organism, essentially, the beginnings of a new global myth. And I think this is spot on. I don't agree with him necessarily, that's what we should do, but I think that's exactly what's happening more so now. And I think we've talked about this on season 1, and that especially like the climate movement has all the hallmarks of a religion. It really does.
Absolutely, yeah. It's complete faith, blind faith. But since that first season, I'm becoming more optimistic of people realizing it's a failed religion.
Because, we got into this, well, it's all centered around, the doomsday motif, we're all going to die, and, the disaster. And, of course, you have these solutions, which aren't necessarily solutions, I don't think, but more so ways to repent. Because I don't think it's more so framed as, this is what you should do to be better. This is more of saying, you should repent from eating meat. You should repent from using these plastic straws because that's evil now. And to live a better future and to avoid this catastrophe, you have to change what you are doing and repent from your previous evil ways.
I'm stealing those comments and I'm making them my own.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, we have proof right here that I said them first.
And our listener will know, but no one else will. But that's a brilliant way to look at it. I think you're absolutely right. But I think that sort of, and I think coming out of the pandemic, where the experts were wrong about everything, I think has really helped us. I hope it'll help us in the long term, because then we need to get back to the point where we want the experts to actually be knowledgeable and informed and honest people, and that other experts will have to look at their work and double check it before anybody will accept it. And we've gotten away from that leading up to the pandemic. And then everybody was like, wait a second, these experts are telling us we have to do it. And we all kind of deferred to them for a period of time. And now there's still a lot of people that defer to them. But it's really coming out in dribs and drabs that they all lied to us. Dr. Birx just testified this last week that the U.S. government, when they said that the vaccines would not spread, once you had the vaccine, you would not be able to spread COVID, that they had no scientific evidence to say that, and they knew it at the time.
Well, I think
it was a hope. It was an aspiration. And that really, I think, is hopefully that'll be like one of the stakes through the heart of this monster, that this deference to the so-called experts who turn out they don't know a whole lot about anything.
Well, I think that goes back to what we were saying about, the generalist versus specialist, because you have all these people, okay, well, here's one unique aspect of, this global phenomenon. This one thing, I know all this knowledge about it, that is representative of all of it. You have to listen to me about this, and of course you get all these people parroting that. And I think...
But it turns out they're all wrong.
Yeah.
So they're subspecialists, hyper-specialists in infectious diseases, but they were all wrong. It's a crisis of competence.
Yes.
In their proclaimed specialty. And I think what we've been doing is taking them as if they're priests into this religion, and they're preaching this homily, and we're supposed to follow it. And all of a sudden, wait a second, that dude's having an affair with the parishioner.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, I don't know, what am I supposed to be doing? And then you start thinking, okay, wait a second, he might be right anyway. Because we are all sinners and that kind of stuff, but he might be all wrong, and we have to look at it. And so I think we're both in agreement that there's this super religion that's this Gaia religion. We got a belief in saving the world through our repentant acts.
But I think also
I'm hoping that they're being discredited by their own stupidity.
I think another one of those stakes through the heart, as you were saying, is a lot of people are starting to consider where are these priest scientists getting their money? I think that's another big question that people are starting to ask. Okay, who's funding this? Who benefits from this particular study, from this particular finding?
Well, they're just selling indulgences, just like the church did in the Middle Ages.
Exactly.
But that's exactly what they're doing. The carbon credits are indulgences.
Interesting.
Al Gore pays carbon credits to some organization, which I'm sure it comes back in the back door. But he had 3 mansions. But I'm paying all these carbon credits, to alleviate global warming. It's an indulgence.
Interesting.
And that's what all this wokeism is just indulgences, so you can get right with the church of left wingism, so that when you do get caught being a sexist prick at a bar, and you almost rape somebody, you have this indulgence that you've already paid to the woke academia, and they bypass you. But if you're not part of if you haven't paid your indulgences and you're some sort of conservative or just a middle class white dude, and you do make the same mistake, you're screwed. Because you haven't paid the dues.
Yeah. Huh.
No, that's a whole different subject.
Yes, it's an interesting topic.
But
to
I think we really do have this like new pseudo.
Yeah. I mean, he really predicted it. I mean, he didn't really say, I know 100% what's going to happen here, but he said, we're seeing the beginnings of this new global myth, and he was in.
I believe that he might be a follower.
Yes.
I think he would be like one of the priests of this religion.
Yes. I don't doubt that. That's what I was just about to say. I mean, he clearly supported this idea, but I think it's gone even farther beyond than what he might have guessed at the time.
Right.
And then we go on. A lot of the latter section of this chapter, he goes into the symbols in the Great Seal of the United States. He talks about a lot of the symbolisms there.
He's really interested in the dollar bill and the
I don't want to go
not gonna go
too into
all
detail here. It's an interesting discussion. So for the listeners out there, either read this or watch the video. But it's an interesting discussion. There are a couple points.
And he's right about the symbolism, but it's all a bunch of that.
It's very detail oriented.
What's the group they're all in? The
Masonic,
Masons.
yeah.
They're all Masons. And are you a member of the Knights of Columbus officially?
I am, yes.
Yeah. So we hate the Masons, by the way. Yeah, we're the anti-Masons.
Yes, I'm
the
aware.
Knights of Columbus.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting
Don't
discussion.
Ever forget that.
Yeah.
The Masons come a calling.
Yeah, I will not listen to the
answer
Masons. Yes, thank you.
I know some people that are the Masons the same as Shriners?
No.
Aren't they affiliated somehow? No.
I don't know. I know because it's the Freemasons and the Shriners are what's their full name?
Oh, the Moolah something or another.
Yeah. I don't think they're affiliated, but I don't know. I'm not entirely sure.
But they did a lot of good work. I don't mean to defend all Masons.
Yes. I understand.
Masons.
But yeah, like I was saying, it's an interesting discussion. But there's some key points here that aren't necessarily related to all the details of the symbols. Particularly, he makes a distinction between reason and thinking in here. And
I like that. I like what he says about this.
He says, basically any living being can think. He says, well, a mouse can figure out how to climb over a wall or navigate through a maze to get cheese. That's thinking. But he says reason has to do with finding the ground of being and the fundamental structuring of order in the universe. It's much deeper than just thinking about the solution to a problem. It's really considering, what is the purpose? What is the root of everything? And he kind of goes on to say, from reason comes mythology, but as of the moment, things are moving too fast to be mythologized. We're still considering these deeper questions, but our times are changing so fast that, we don't really have time to set in these new stories and these new myths.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. I think he's right about that. And I feel like the rate of change is going to slow because we've reached almost close to peak leisure, where you have the entire universe of knowledge literally at your fingertips with your phone. And of course, nobody looks it up. They just look at videos of people dancing. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah.
Very much.
Well,
the
it's
media
that
may
one.
change. The different platform may change, but I think we have all those massive changes in technology and society from when I was your age to today. I think it's been a big wave, and I think it's going to slow down now. And I think that's when.
Well, it reminds me of the one, I don't know if it's a quote or if, whatever you want to call it, but it's hard times create strong men, men create good times create weak men create hard times.
Yeah.
So it's this big cycle of, we build up this life of leisure, and then it kind of crumbles down because we don't have any of these great, strong leaders. But then, from these hard times come the better leaders and so forth, and it repeats all over. Right. And I think we're kind of really at that point now where, it's all the weak men. And, you need to figure out, okay, how are we going to build back to better times?
Yeah. There's still a lot of good, strong men and women out there. So it's like the Roman Empire lasted for centuries after the first few struggles. They had a civil war, and it lasted several centuries beyond that. And then after the Roman Empire ended, the Byzantine Empire lasted for like another 1,200 years, maybe longer than that.
I'm not entirely sure on that.
And that's a similar structure, similar society, just next door. And it was part of the part of the entire empire at one point. So I'm trying not to be as pessimistic as I have been in the past. And as Adam Smith said, there's a lot of ruin in the nation, meaning there's a lot that you can ruin before it goes under, and so we're kind of pissing away a lot of stuff now. I think our monetary policy is the biggest danger to us for our society, because if that seizes up, all hell's going to break loose. Yeah. But that'll be the hard times for sure. But as long as we kind of manage that, I don't know. I'm cautiously optimistic of a revival soon. Not necessarily a Christian revival, but some sort of civic revival. There's only so much you can do.
It's a revival of reason is what we need. Yeah. I think that's really what he's kind of saying here, is that we need to get back to really trying to answer those underlying questions that our reason prompts us to ask.
There's too many absurdities and contradictions in American society in the last 2 years. It just cannot, what cannot go on will not go on.
Yeah.
And with all the lies that they want you to repeat, is just everybody's getting that it's just a form of power, because if I can make you say something false that you know is false, I can make you do anything, and that's what they're trying to do at this point. And I think
I think it's really, it's a big web essentially. Once people start to realize, I don't agree with the crowd on this one issue, I need to start thinking about what else I don't agree with the crowd essentially.
I think, we're at the point now that the regular people that don't pay attention to politics and don't care about it are like, what? These guys are crazy bastards. They're all fucking crazy. This dude who's like 6'3", full beard, isn't addressed at the library. What the fuck is he reading to these kids for? And we have a friend who I will not identify who bragged about taking her little daughter to drag show story time at the library like 3 years ago. Cutting edge stupidity at the time, and now she's like mainstream stupidity. And I think people like they don't pay attention to stuff are like, what
yeah,
you're gonna do what? And it always turns out that one of the maybe not all of them, but a good number, 1 in 10 is going to have a bad criminal record. Like, oh yeah, we forgot to do a criminal background check on that one.
Yeah.
No,
that's a very.
My theory is about mall Santa Clauses.
I don't.
Oh, I've shared this with you.
You probably have.
I'm going to defame all mall Santa Clauses, so I apologize because I'm sure there's some very good people. But my theory is that they're all terrible people. Because what man in the right mind would willingly allow a series of children over an 8-hour shift to sit on your lap, half of which will be crying, misbehaving, or doing whatever? Who would want that job? I'll tell you who. Desperate people that can't get a job anywhere else, or freaks. Who would want that job?
That's a good
There's
point.
not a normal man that I know that will do that job. Won't do it. Do you know why? Who wants it? Nobody wants to have a series of children sit on their laps. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand.
So then you have to ask yourself, okay, who wants, what man wants to dress up in a dress and read books to little kids in a library? Not a single normal one. Not a single safe one to be around kids in a library. And that one, I believe. The Santa Claus one, you can see, well, they just enjoy making people happy. Okay. That's why you never went to a small Santa Claus. Do you notice that? You never went to one.
I've noticed that. I've never gone to a mall Santa Claus.
Now, granted, I don't like lines and crowds either. And that's what they are. So there's a little overlap of I just like. But anyway, so back to the subject is... this kind of craziness can only go so long. So I'm getting all optimistic, and I think he's right about this degradation of the common story and ethos and belief system, whatever that may be in the United States. It doesn't seem like we all have the same beliefs. We're having fundamental arguments about what it is to be an American, and it used to be that we'd all agree that America is generally a good country. But we need to make it better.
Yeah, we'd all agree on the what it is, what an American is and what America is, but you wouldn't agree on, kind of how to further that, essentially.
Correct. Right.
But now we're at the point where we've completely, we don't even agree on what America is.
Yeah, but it's not as bad as I sometimes think it is, because we're not at a civil war point.
Yes.
Yet we're not out there killing each other for these political fights yet. But there's a lot of lawlessness. There's a lot of people getting murdered every day in this country, and it's just an unreported tragedy. And there are solutions, and they aren't complicated, but they're difficult, and it takes people just to admit the truth that of what you need to do to solve the vast majority of violent crime in the United States. And it's a tough discussion to have, and people don't want to do it because it means you have to go back to those core beliefs that you shouldn't have sex before marriage, which is completely repudiated in our society. And if you conceive a child, you're going to support that child until past 18 years of age. 18 is a minimum, but past that, and you're going to devote your life to that child. And if you don't, then you're a scumbucket, and you are excised from polite society.
Well, I think that goes exactly back to what he was talking about, because if you're raised in a household that doesn't have that relationship there, that love there, then you don't learn those myths. You don't learn those social roles. And so that's what he was saying earlier. Of course, that's why we get the gangs, and that's why we get the violence, because you create your own social roles.
To.
Yes.
They are left with no alternative from what they're doing now. There's no alternative for them, and it's just so tragic, and nobody's doing a goddamn thing about it.
Yes.
Nobody is. Yes. Nobody cares. I'm fed up. I'm about to start caring.
Congratulations. That's a good quote. That's a quote for the back of a shirt right there. I'm fed up. I'm going to start caring. That is a good one.
I'm about to start
caring. Yeah.
Well, what I mean by that is if I care about it, if I really care about it, I'm going to do something about it. But I don't care enough about it to do anything about it other than bitch. And that means I don't really care about it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's another problem, to kind of go.
It's apathy. There's so much apathy about our ethos and our values and what America is. And we're all just kind of like trying to ride it out.
It's not just that we disagree on what those underlying values are. It's that a lot of people do not care to find out.
Yeah, and I think there is a competing weird, like we were talking about the weird Gaia religion and this. They have talismans, like abortion is one of them. They never really thought about what abortion is. The pro-choice people are, but they know it should be a sacrosanct right to have an abortion. That's one of them. The patriarchal society now is like becoming one of them. These other concepts. You have to tax the rich, even though the rich pay like a disproportionate amount of money in taxes. But anywho,
that was quite a tangent. To get back to really
they have a set of values, the set of religious beliefs. It's just they don't recognize it as a religion.
Yes, I agree. To get back to what Campbell's saying, he has this really neat point in here. These 4 functions of myth. What functions do myths serve? The first that he says is mystical. This mystical function. Realizing what a wonder the universe is and opening us up to the mystery in all things. That's the first function. The second is cosmological, kind of uncovering the shape of the universe. And I really like what he says here. Scientists often tell us how something works, but myth is needed to explain what something is. And he says, for example, fire. The scientist would say, well, oxidation causes fire, but what is fire itself? You can't really get an answer on that.
Right.
And then the other two are the sociological function, supporting a certain social order.
Yes.
And then the fourth is the pedagogical function, to teach us how to live as humans and to live this human lifetime under any circumstances. Those are the 4 functions of myth, and I think that is, essentially what we've been saying here is, that's what's really needed today is to get these 4 underlying messages everywhere, essentially.
It's almost like we need to start like a civic club, not call it a religion, but make it a religion.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Like we should design a civic club that is, for all intents and purposes, a religion with religious ceremonies and procedures and rites of passage. And we could make millions on that because people are just thirsting for religion. but they don't want to call it a religion.
Hmm.
They don't want to call it a faith. I think that's a brilliant idea. Now that I just thought of it.
I think you've had this exact idea before, except you called it a cult.
Well, it would be a cult. It would be a cult, but we wouldn't call it a cult.
Yes.
And we wouldn't call it. I had my idea before was actually an express religious cult,
Mm-hmm.
and you could make a lot of money at it. But now I'm thinking about it. We can make like a pseudo non-denominational Christian club. We used to see it like there was a big men's movement. What were those called? They promised. Oh, it was like men's promise clubs. It was before you were a little kid. It was hugely popular.
Mm-hmm.
They'd fill arenas with these. It was a men's. What was it called? Our listener may know, but they'd take a pledge,
Mm-hmm.
and then the women, their wives, would take pledges to be, because the Bible says the women are subservient, and so, I forget what the saying, the actual phrasing is, but the men are to be the leader of the family, and the women are to defer to him, but then he has to serve because kind of as the back and forth, he has to serve his wife, but he has to be the leader of the family, and it's all kind of bullshit, but that was a huge deal. I think maybe in the 80s or 90s. Maybe it was the 90s. And then I can't remember what happened with it. I think somebody stole a bunch of money or somebody had an affair. It just kind of dissolved. The standard.
I mean, it kind of goes back to that mythological role. You kind of put the leader of this, up on a pedestal, and they're the leader. But once you see, oh, they've done something awful, and then you start to see the person rather than the role, and the whole thing kind of dissolves.
I'm going completely off topic now.
Yes.
I just watched a documentary of, was it Wilson? The founder of AA.
Oh.
Fascinating story.
Really?
And he was famous among the AA followers, and he formed it with some other people and really sacrificed his entire life to he was an alcoholic, of course. And but he didn't want to give interviews because, well, he knew he was flawed.
Yeah.
Because he was a terrible drunk before this was formed, and he's a sinner like all of us. But he recognized that if he became too much of a figurehead of it, he could bring down the entire organization. He wanted it to outlive him because it helps so many people, and I think that was so smart of him.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about him. I was just killing time. I watched a documentary about him, but I need to read about that guy. But
Interesting.
But I think, back to my original point is that there is a missing. Everybody needs a religion, and I think we need to supply one for them that's the proper one.
Yeah.
Without, it would be blasphemous, of course.
Yes, of course. What's a religion without a little blasphemy to the one we already practice?
Oh yeah, what is that? Darn it!
Yeah, what a shame.
Always
a flaw. Always a flaw.
Weakness.
But yeah, that's the last major point I wanted to make in those four functions. I kind of wanted to read a little bit from what he ends with. He ends with the Chief Seattle's letter to the federal government.
Really?
I don't necessarily agree. I just want to read some sections of it.
Devotee to the Indian,
but I think
myth.
It's
the myth of the modern Indian as some sort of.
I just think it sums up a lot of what
pure,
Joseph Campbell is saying in this chapter.
Because they worshipped the land and they are part of the land.
Yes, but this was a letter that was written.
Did they not murder each other? Did they not scalp each other? Oh yes, they did. But they were these idealistic.
I just think
they're wonderful.
This illustrates
of the land.
A lot of what he is saying here.
And if it weren't for those evil European people, we would have all lived in peace and happiness. We should have converted to their religious, mythological beliefs, and the world would be much better off. Because then we can traipse around this country as illiterate nomads, living free and peacefully as we, go to war with each other. And, brutally murder each other and all that kind of stuff. Yes.
Are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. So this was a letter that was written to the federal government after the government asked to buy some tribal lands. I just wanted to read a couple of the lines here. It starts off with, the president in Washington sends word that he wishes to buy our land. But how can you buy or sell the sky, the land? The idea is strange to us. If we do not own the freshness of the air and the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them? This we know, the earth does not belong to man, man belongs to the earth. All things are connected like the blood that unites us all. Man did not weave the webs of life, he is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. As we are part of the land, you too are part of the land. This earth is precious to us. It is also precious to you. One thing we know, there is only one God. No man, be he red man or white man, can be apart. We are brothers, after all. And that's how he ends this chapter here, this section of the interview, which I know you've just said your thoughts on. But I do think that sums up a lot of what he's saying, and sort of that, the universality and sort of the relation to nature that myths should have. And of course, those are the kind of the things that we most disagreed with him here.
Yeah.
So I think, you were a little upset that that's what he chose to end on, because we agree with him.
Upset. It's just so. Well, it's like, the fact of the matter is, property ownership is fundamental to an ordered society. Period.
Explain.
And the Indians owned stuff.
Yes.
Okay? They controlled land. They were just nomads. Okay? So, but if another tribe came within their territory, they wouldn't just say, "Welcome, brother. We're all brothers in this land, and we don't own it.
Yes.
And you don't own it either, but we're all shaking hands and singing songs together."
Yes. Well, I think this illustrates what we were talking about just before, is that, there is that hypocrisy there, so you don't.
My problem is that the author is idealizing it.
Yes, I understand.
And I get, and I think that sentiment in that letter is absolutely correct. We're all brothers. We're all Catholics, whether we know it or not. Whether we acknowledge it or not. Well, the Catholic Church is we believe that it's the one true religion, and everybody really is a Catholic, and we want to help them along that path.
Yes.
And we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, and I believe that. And I don't disagree with everything that's in that letter, except for it's impractical.
Yes.
It's a statement of faith when it's in response to a civic intergovernmental proposal. Okay? The proposal is, hey, we want to buy some property from you. And he starts talking about we can't own the sky. Okay? He needs to say, no, you didn't pay us enough. Okay? Or it's not for sale. It's ours.
Yeah.
It's not, nobody owns it, because if nobody owns it, then the president in Washington should just say, well, then move.
Yeah.
What right do you have to be here? If we all own it, get the hell out of there. We're going to plant a farm, So I think as a matter of philosophy, it's a beautiful letter.
Yes.
Artistic even.
Yes.
Maybe it should be framed in script and put it on a wall.
Oh, boy.
But as a matter of management of limited resources, it's complete bullshit.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes, to show, the incompatibility of these separate, societies, like we were talking about earlier, and that, one, I don't know what the word I'm looking for here, but, like you were saying, that property and all that, that's the practical,
Correct.
To creating this ordered society. But if you're just saying in this other society, well, we don't own anything, how do you function? You cannot function within that other society.
Correct.
Yes.
You can't function within your own society. It's a lie.
Yes.
I mean, I think so. I think it's a complete and total lie. They have their own stuff.
Yes.
It reminds me, I think I've told the story before. I went on a tour. I was a kid. I went on a tour of a monastery. Did I tell you this?
I don't think so.
Oh, I went on a tour of a monastery. Mom and Dad. And I think it was in Iowa, and it was pretty, and it was very Spartan. They didn't have a lot of furnishings, but they each had their own little dorm room. All the monks, and they gave us a tour, and they prayed 10 times a day or something.
What kind of monastery?
Franciscan? I don't know. I don't remember. I was a kid.
So it's Catholic.
Oh, it's Catholic. Absolutely Catholic. Yeah. Why would I tour some? Did anybody else have any monasteries?
I don't know.
Are there
I think
non-Catholic monasteries?
Well, I mean, I think you can say that about a lot of things. I mean,
let's
like
a
a Buddhist monastery. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway,
Yes.
so it was definitely Catholic.
Yes. Okay.
I think. Yeah. Anyway, and and this guy was giving us a tour, and he showed us his room, and he had a beautiful, I think it was a watch or maybe a crucifix. It was something really, really expensive. And it was clearly a really, really expensive item, some sort of jewelry or something. And somebody pointed out oh, that's really beautiful. He says, yes, that my mom gave me that when I was ordained. But he had been this whole thing is that we're at a commune. So it's true communism because we share everything. And I don't know if I did or my dad, and I think it must have been me.
How old were you?
I was real little.
Really?
I was like maybe 7.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 7 or 8. I mean, it was real little. Anyway, the question is asked. I don't want to take credit for it, but I think I asked it. Well, can anybody else have that? Because nobody else can have that. He said, no, that's mine. My mom gave it to me. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it's all flowers and happiness until it's the thing you care about, and then it's yours. And that's the problem with communism. Yeah. And that's a problem with this worship of this nobody owns the sky or the land. Well, yeah, until you believe that until somebody wants to take your teepee, because you own that and it's on your property. When you're sitting there, it's yours. And when you go back to the happy hunting grounds or whatever, you go back to this place or that place, and somebody's already there, you're like, wait a second, that's ours. Yeah. Well, what do you mean it's yours? You don't own it. Well, somebody's got to assert control over it. And that's just the reality.
Yes.
So.
Well, that was a very long discussion from me just reading. I
warned you not to.
Yes, I am aware. I am aware.
You knew.
I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming.
You encouraged it.
But yeah, what are your?
I saw the gleam in your eyes.
Yes.
You're reading the excerpt of the "We Don't Own the Sky."
Oh my God. Okay. Overall, what were your thoughts on this chapter? Just generally speaking.
I think it was brilliant. I very thought provoking, and I give I'm obviously going on a rant about the Native American stuff, but yeah, I think he's just such a smart, articulate advocate for his position, and really thought provoking, and very very much enjoyed it, and I think he's obviously right about so much stuff, and I don't even know if I'm comfortable even saying he's wrong about anything, because it's so thought-provoking in the way he articulates it. And he's pretty precise in his answers. And he doesn't overstate his case, except for the whole, it's really just a prediction of what he thinks is going to happen. So he's not actually saying this is the way it should be or the way it's going to be. So I don't even say it's inaccurate or wrong, but
I mean it's really good on both parts here, both from Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell. Yes. I think Bill Moyers is asking a lot of great questions, and of course Joseph Campbell's giving just brilliant answers to all of them. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to going through the next chapters, the journey inward. So it might be a little more spiritual and that sort of thing. Yes, I know you love that. But really sort of looking at, how this reflects on the self instead of, society at large, which I think will be interesting to get into. But yeah, I mean, he's just so smart. I mean, so articulate in every single thing that he says. And he has all these examples, and I mean, we didn't mention a lot of the specifics, but of course he's, pulling on, in this, region here, they have these practices, and we didn't really go into the details there, but I mean, it's clear that he just knows a lot about a lot, essentially.
Yeah, and you could tell he would be a wonderful college professor. Yeah. You could see why so many people he was a very popular instructor, evidently. You could see why he would be a great person to take, mythology 101 from.
Well, my favorite professor that I've had, is the one who would just go on tangents about everything, because it's, you're
trained for that from birth.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. But it's like, you can really tell that he loves the subject matter and that he knows a lot about a lot of areas of the subject matter. Again, it's that, the specialist or the generalist. And, the generalist will likely give you the better lessons because he can pull on a lot of different things instead of just this one narrow, avenue that he travels down that he knows.
Right. Truth.
I mean,
good stuff.
Yes, very good to read. But yeah, I guess we're gonna wrap things up here. Yep. Any closing thoughts? Any closing remarks?
No, I've
tangents?
Said enough.
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
You have. But this has been Season 3, Episode 2 of Unlimited Opinions. You can, of course, follow us on Twitter to get updates on when we post our new episodes. We'll do some sort of competition maybe this season for a T-shirt.
Maybe a cap.
Maybe a cap. But yeah, you can follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions. Opinions. But yeah, I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
This has been Unlimited Opinions. good episode. Very political, maybe more political than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I shouldn't have been. I should have refrained.
Yeah, that's all right. It'll be interesting for whoever listens to this. Yeah, you're starting your manifesto already.